Terrific. Welcome, everybody. I am calling to order the Finance and Administration Committee meeting for the Marin Water on June 22nd, 2023. May I please have a roll call?
Yes, good morning. Director Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
Director Larry Russell,
Here.
Director Matt Sampson, Vice Chair Monty Schmidt, and Chair Jed Smith.
Here. May I please have an adoption of the agenda motion?
Director Smith, really quickly before adoption of the agenda, I just wanted to point out item number 4 on the agenda today was a placeholder in the event that the budget adoption needed to be brought back to this committee for any follow-up items. However, the board moved to adopt that item on Tuesday night. Therefore, my recommendation to the committee would just be adopt the agenda with the removal of that item.
Appreciate that. I'd support that change, and I'm glad we had it in there, and I'm glad we didn't need to continue and that we had a robust positive outcome on Tuesday. So I'll make the motion, if that's all right, to adopt the agenda with the note that we will be taking out item 4.
Second that.
Great. Roll call, please.
Yes,
Or actually, should we do a roll call now, or should we look for public comment on the items on the agenda?
you may, but there isn't any.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
So roll call, please.
Director Kush.
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schmidt,
Aye.
and Chair Smith.
Terrific. All right, so now we'll move on to the fiscal year 23-24 annual insurance renewal. We had some earlier comments from Matt, who's joining us at Alliant, and thank you and welcome again. So I'll hand it off to Brett and Matt and the team.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Smith. And just a brief introduction to this item. This is a review and refer item to the board. We'll bring it back in July for full approval. This is part of our annual process of renewing our insurance policies, various policies and lines of coverage we do have. As will be explained by our brokers here at Alliant Insurance, Seth and Matt, we are seeing significant increases in these policies, particularly in property, but these have been expected and have been already incorporated into the budget. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Seth and to Matt to kind of walk us through the details here.
Thank you, Brett. Appreciate it. I'll kick it off. Matt McManus, good to see everyone again. Senior Vice President at Alliant. I work within our public entity division. Along with me is Seth Cole, also Senior Vice President. Seth is actually for water and wastewater, he's the team lead for the entire niche across the country. So glad to have Seth. Seth is also on the team and participates on the placement of your insurance. First and foremost, I do want to thank the Finance Committee for your support. I also want to thank the finance team, Brett and Shelley, for their support and the great teamwork that they put together with Alliant throughout this renewal process in very challenging marketplace. Taking a few steps back, Alliant started providing insurance updates, market insurance updates to the district the second week of January of this year. Okay. And we continue to throughout the year. Alliant provided very early budget expectations by line of coverage on February 24th. Okay. The market has taken a turn for the worse since we provided those budgets. We are very happy to report that we came in below the overall budget. We budgeted, I believe it was, actually, I know, it was 22.5. We came in at 19.5. Which represents about $40,000 in premium dollars under budget. I know that might not feel like a win, but what we're seeing in this marketplace with the overall budget, if you fall below 20%, it's a success. Also, we're here today presenting a complete program. That might not feel like a success, but we also have many clients, and we know there's many public entities out there that even today, with July 1st a week away, they don't have complete programs. They're still waiting on quotes and looking at budgets that are up 50%. So although, we are up, we've explained the market, a lot of this is driven by really the property renewal, and we're happy to go over that. Shelley, do you want to pull up the one document that's within the board packet that goes line by line? Or Brett?
I'll pull that up here just a minute.
Thank you. And as we're pulling it up, obviously we welcome any questions from the Finance Committee. Thank you, sir. All right. So as far as really the main drivers in this marketplace are liability and property being the worst. Currently right now, your liability, you have 3 different layers. You buy up to 25 million of coverage with 3 carriers participating on the program. Okay. That's up 11%, which in this market, again, is not bad. We were under budget with the liability program. Excess workers' comp down, which is great, and we totally expected that's kind of a flat line of coverage. If you could scroll down, we'll come back to property because that's the biggest outlier. But the inland marine, that's up a little bit, not much. That has to do with your APE, but that market that's kind of a hard market. But we're happy that it's only up $2,000. The aviation drone coverage, flat, basically, that covers the drones in motion and not in motion. The cyber market, we're happy to report is pretty much flat as well. I mean, 2 years ago, we were looking at over 100% premium increases year over year, where, in today's market, we're happy to report that, again, it's pretty close to flat. Pollution, same thing, barely up at all. And your crime insurance is same. It's pretty much flat. But if you wouldn't mind scrolling back up, really the biggest outlier here is the property rate. And what that represents year over year is a total cost increase of 41% year over year. The account rate is up 30%, and your total insured values are up 8%, mainly due to trending of values. So really, I mean, again, the property market, if you read the headlines with what's going on, the cat environment, losses, reinsurance, inflation, wildfires, obviously, it's a bad market. We have carriers that are pulling out of California. We don't really have capacity coming in. So it's an extremely hard marketplace when it comes to the property market. We explained this to you last month. I can't overstate, this is the toughest property market in a generation. So we're happy that we have a complete program. Although again, it doesn't feel good. It's up 41%. It's the best deal in the market on behalf of the district. So I'm going to pause there and really turn it over to you guys and see if we have any questions. Also, Seth, if you have anything to add color to my previous narrative.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and hello, everyone. Nice to see you all, and thank you for allowing us to participate in your meeting this morning. Yeah, I actually, just before I jumped on here, I presented renewal figures for an insurance program for 60 water and wastewater agencies throughout the state that are jointly purchasing insurance coverages together. And just put into perspective, their program, they buy and purchase a lot of the same similar coverages that you do on a different scale, of course. As a group, they're much larger, but just presented to them a year-over-year increase in their insurance program cost 23.7%. Just to give you an idea that, it's in the ballpark of where you guys are. their property program costs were up 40% year over year. So again, very similar to yours. And for them, property was the largest cost driver as well. And as Matt indicated, in California, unfortunately, right, wrong, or indifferent, the wildfire activity that we've had the past couple of years has really turned the market sour on California. Not to mention the recent winter storms that we had, the flooding and storm-related damage. And, just to give you an idea of, what's happening in the insurance market in California is that it's not just commercial buyers, meaning, the district is in the commercial insurance marketplace for property insurance. It's now trickling over into the personal homeowners market. I don't know if you all saw the big news the past couple of weeks, is that two of the major biggest players in homeowners insurance in California are no longer going to write policies in California, State Farm and Allstate, because of the concern with wildfire risk. And so while it's very challenging in the commercial insurance market, it's about to get very challenging for all of us personally in the homeowners market. And that's really indicative of what's happening in the insurance market in California. And as Matt said, we're happy to take any questions that any of you have.
I have a couple questions. I'm real curious about the property. I don't really understand the 200 million versus the 502 million, number one. Are we primarily insuring our own property or other, is it CGL type stuff for other liability? And why aren't we participating in something like that 60 water agencies together? Why wouldn't we join something like that?
Yeah, great questions. To address your first question, the 502 million are the district's own insured values. So those are the values that the district insures, the assets that you own that are insurable. The limit of insurance that you purchase is 200 million per occurrence. So in any one event, any one wildfire, any one storm event, the limits of insurance that the district purchases is 200 million.
There's no cap on the total?
There's no aggregate, correct. So you could have, and heaven forbid this were ever to happen, you could have multiple $200 million losses in a year.
That would be
And that includes the real property, personal property, as well as business income.
Correct.
Your values associated that make up that 502 million. The
That
likelihood of one loss hitting 502 is very, very unlikely.
Correct. And to your second question regarding, there are a couple of what we would call risk pools out there that, smaller to medium-sized water and wastewater agencies participate in. The groups would be the California Sanitation Risk Management Authority, Association of California Water Agencies, JPIA, and then the Special Districts Risk Management Authority. These are are available to the district to explore. It's it would be a shift in philosophy on how you buy insurance, but that doesn't mean you couldn't explore that. I know there's been discussions in the past about those being possible alternatives for the district. And so absolutely you have the opportunity to explore those. We would be happy to help you explore those options. Again, it's just a little bit different philosophy. For instance, a lot of them, you take a $500,000 self-insured retention on your liability program. Most of these risk pools, you shift your deductible to be much smaller, maybe 25,000, 50,000, or 100,000. The end result would likely result in maybe you paying more for your insurance coverage because you're taking less risk, right? So there's a kind of a trade-off there. But again, happy to help you explore those in the future if there's interest by the district to explore those alternatives. I will say those groups have not been immune to increases. They're seeing the same types of increases that you guys are seeing as well.
No, but I was thinking that if you've got this event issue on the property, then I would assume they're all aren't going to get hit at the same time. So there must be some flexibility.
We certainly hope that's true, correct. So on a property perspective, right, that's what we'd call spread of risk, right? So these groups are statewide. So you get to spread your risk a little bit more, which is more favorable to the underwriters. also there's more values at risk, right? So it's kind of a trade-off for the underwriters. But you would be participating in a larger group, which in theory could result in a better rate.
Yeah, you mentioned that had been discussed before. I don't recall that ever being discussed with us, but
Director Russell, just wanted to share that we are looking into, so we'd be prepared in the next year into
sure.
the aqua pool. Because it
Okay.
is something we do need to look into and understand if that benefits and what the trade-offs are. And we'll bring that back to a finance committee later in the year.
Oh, that's good. Is there any exclusion in those groups on dams?
No, you can, it's a separate exposure that can be underwritten and covered, both from dams from a liability perspective. You have dam failure liability coverage that all can be underwritten by those risk pools and included in coverage. A little more challenging on the property side. Dams aren't historically a great property risk for underwriters. It's not that it can't be done. It can be done, usually at a pretty significant cost.
Yeah, well, either you be your own insurance or you buy the insurance, right? You got your choice.
Well, either you're right, you're taking the risk yourself or you're transferring it to someone else.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Just a quick question about understanding the property risk at a $200 million per occurrence. Have we ever done an evaluation of what our risk is to these types of events? Like what should we have a wildfire? I think is probably the thing that first comes to mind, where we lose one of our facilities, something significant is lost. What would we expect might be the range of the cost of that event? And hence, do we have the right limits? I think another question I'd have is also just what influence our deductible might play in helping us to keep these cost increases down, which are, of course, it's across the whole industry, but what can we do to reduce our own impacts?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Matt certainly jump in. Yeah, you raise a couple of really good questions. Wildfire modeling is pretty new and imperfect at this point. It's a relatively, it doesn't feel like it because we've been experiencing some significant wildfire losses back to 2017, but it's a relatively new exposure for the insurance industry from a catastrophic perspective, the types of losses we've seen the last few years. So we do have the ability to model for wildfire. We also have the ability to run, and this is something that the insurance carriers do behind the scenes, is that for every location that you have on your property schedule, they run what they call a risk meter score. And so they score your wildfire hazard from high, medium to low. It actually assigns a number. Anything above 70 is considered a higher wildfire score. You do have a couple of treatment plants that are considered high hazard wildfire risks. With a treatment plant, as you well know, is it because of the way they're constructed, oftentimes they wouldn't be a total loss in the event of a wildfire. Now that is certainly possible. We did learn from the in the Paradise fire that you can have significant losses. The wildfire ripped through that entire treatment plant up there, but it was not a total loss. The treatment plant actually survived pretty well. But these are things that we can do and help you with to, again, it's imperfect, but it can give us a good idea if that $200 million limit is appropriate or sufficient. To your second question regarding deductible, you have a pretty healthy deductible, $1 million. So each and every property claim, you're taking a fair amount of risk. Certainly there is a relationship between what your deductible is and what your premium is. If you were to increase that deductible to, let's say, $1.5 million or $2 million, we would expect some type of premium savings. Maybe, you'd have to run the numbers, of course, maybe 10, 15% possibly. So then you have to just do the cost benefit analysis. Are you willing to take that much more risk for, say, $40,000 or $50,000 in premium savings, right? And that's a process we could work through with you.
And I'll jump in quickly, if you may. I'm looking at your schedule of values again, which equates to your real property, your personal property, and your business income for all the locations that you have, including the treatment plants. Your highest value location is the treatment plant, at Woodacre, California. And total TIV for that this year is under 200 million. So if you had a full loss at that treatment plant, you would have a covered loss, right? So that same occurrence, again, you have a 200 million per occurrence. That same occurrence would have to take down the whole treatment plant as well as hit another location for you to exceed that 200 million. Outside of the 195 for the treatment plant in Woodacre, the next lowest total insured value location is the treatment plant in Fairfax, which is coming in at 110 million. So again, you would have to have two locations that were hit that would exceed 200 million to have a full loss and really, take everything down. Outside of the 110 million of that second treatment plant, the next highest value you have is the office where you're sitting today, and that's coming in at 17 million.
How did the deductible, the SIR, get set? At 1 million, what's the basis of that?
That was a couple years ago, Seth, I believe, and that was an option that the district decided to move forward to take advantage of the premium difference between, that option versus the deductible option at that time.
No, I understand that, and I recall that, but
Yep.
why 1 million versus 2 million? Because I mean, 50 grand. I don't think we've ever gotten into our insurance, as I recall.
I don't recall us getting into that level of loss either. I do recall that we increased our limits a few years ago to the $1 million limits. We've been inching it up, just as we're describing here, to try to defray the costs of the annual premiums. And then as Seth and Matt have mentioned, if we do decide to increase our deductible going forward, that's just more risk on us and more requirement to hold capital, to hold reserves for that, right? So it's a risk reward. That's what the nature of insurance is. I think we're trying to generally, kind of get through this last couple of years of big increases. And then I think the board has mentioned quite a few times a desire for us to do some further analysis going forward to identify other options to either reduce our premium deductibles and or find ways to offset the risk. So we'll do that over the next couple months and come back to the board.
Yeah, because this one seems pretty straightforward to me. I mean, of course, what you said is correct. But on the other hand, if we've never used it, which to my recollection, we never have, and it can be like Stanford, they canceling their earthquake insurance before the Loma Prieta, but let's assume we're luckier than that. And I'm thinking about the treatment plants. I mean, I guess you could burn the roofs off of the buildings, but I don't know that you could actually burn a treatment plant. I mean, there's no fuel.
Yeah, the concrete tanks are gonna be kept cool anyway with the water, but yeah, all the appurtenances would, the electric systems, those, the big new backup generator we put in, we could get damage.
Maybe, but I
pretty-
mean, I'd be more worried about the fuel for the generator burning.
Well,
That one
okay.
I could understand, but as far as the generator itself, I mean, my guess is you could have a generator sitting in the middle of a forest fire and you'd burn the paint off the outside of the housing, but you wouldn't burn the generator.
Yeah, the Santa Rosa fire, there was a fire station that burned down and there was a water tank behind it that went through this inferno. You couldn't even tell.
Yeah.
Even on the paint. Yeah, because it was full of cold water.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's
Yeah, I
pretty
appreciate
significant
that comment.
power going through these treatment plants, right? I mean, we have a fairly large amount of energy that PG&E is providing, or
Yeah, so
The likelihood of a full loss at one of those treatment plants is likely nil, but you never know. But I agree with you on your comment there, sir.
I think the part that I'm trying to get a good understanding about is do we have the right limits? Because if if our treatment plants are really our biggest risk, but we have an occurrence of $200 million, but it's unlikely that we would go that high. I want to make sure we have the right coverage, but I also want to make sure that we're balancing that correctly. That we don't have a level of coverage that we are unlikely.
I believe the highest risk event for us is not a wildfire. It's in fact a earthquake,
Yeah.
seismic event
Yeah.
that's system wide. What, and the cost, depending on the size of event, right, would just be brutal. FEMA is part of the calculus as well, where they look at how much insurance you have, and if it's a declared federal natural disaster, there's more often than not money available.
And does that mean that they'll subrogate on something like this?
In terms of look how, they'll have the insurance pay what they can, right, and cover the other at a like 80 to 20. It depends on the nature of the event.
But then the insurance company's reimbursed.
No, insurance has to pay. FEMA pays above what your insurance covers.
I see. Okay. So there's no subrogation, guys?
Correct. There could potentially be subrogation. We did see, for instance, where there was a power utility that was responsible for causing a wildfire. Then we did see where insurance companies subrogated against PG&E.
And I'm going to jump in here on the earthquake insurance. That's another line of coverage that year over year is up. It's even more than 30%, 40%. It's up 50 to 60 on some cases. Yep. In 2009, I authored a letter to the district, dear Mick Young. It's dated September 5th, 2019. Did provide an earthquake analysis and provided limit options at 5 million, 10 million, and 25 million for earthquake coverage. The 5 million cost $165,000. The 10 million cost $275,000, and the 25 million of earthquake coverage cost $525,000. Now those numbers, no joke, are probably double, and we may not even be able to get 25 million of coverage in this marketplace. Earthquake carriers, they used to put out capacity of 10 to 15 million for one carrier. Today, it's 5 million. Move on to the next to build limit. So again, that 5 million probably is definitely in the 200 range, but probably 250 to 300,000 for 5 million of earthquake coverage.
And what's the exclusion? When do they start paying? How much do you have to eat yourself?
Thank you. Well, that's not an exclusion. It's the deductible. That would be a 5% deductible based on that location of coverage. So again, say you have the power plant, right, at, let's just call it 200 million. I'm not great at math. I use a calculator. 5%. You would be responsible for 10 million on that 200 million before that 5 million coverage would kick in. Great questions, sir. Thank you.
It's better than the housing insurance, but it's still a pretty big hit, huh?
Yeah, in California, 5% is literally the lowest deductible option that will be offered. We can get you 10. Sometimes we can get 2, but it is costly. But 5% in California is most notable. And believe it or not, your peers, I would say, I'd say less than 50%, actually buy earthquake coverage because of the cost.
Sounds to me like it would make sense to update that letter to whatever the current costs are, just to have the information. It's one of those things where, it's a very hard call on insurance for earthquakes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to, sir. If you wouldn't mind, can I request, just because the insurance marketplace is just, it's a mess right now. And I'm happy to, I could probably get it to you in the next, I would say 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, at your convenience. I don't think it's something.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
Is critical. It seems to me it would be wise.
In addition to property infrastructure, one of our big risks associated with wildfire is contamination of our reservoirs. Is that covered under the pollution coverage?
Yeah, it very well could be. I think it would depend on, is the loss, the cost to decontaminate the reservoir, the waters in the reservoir. We'll drill down on that a little bit further on what the specific coverage parameters are regarding that as respects to contamination of the water in the reservoir. So let us drill down on that and get you a better, more concise answer, and we'll provide that to to staff to circulate to the board members.
Great. And what else is covered under the pollution
Mhm.
coverage?
So under a pollution policy, you might have, any kind of chemicals that are used at the treatment facility, the gas at the generator, any kind of cleanup or whatnot. If the water source is contaminated and provides damage to third parties, there's a third party component as well to that. That's big picture. We can certainly get into a lot more detail, and we can have a separate session if you want to really talk about the nuts and bolts of pollution coverage.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if it covers water, but we carry it and it's all for third party stuff. We spill something and we have to clean it up and affect somebody else. So I have a feeling it's similar. We're contractors, so it's a little different perhaps, but always on somebody else's property. So.
Great. Any other questions, group? I mean, my only last comment is that, given our investments in infrastructure and our contemplation of upgrading the San Geronimo treatment plant to help deal with reduced seismic risk, hopefully that'll help reduce our insurance in the future. And that would be a calculus that we can look at. And that'll take a few years, and I'm happy we're making some of these important investments. All right. Unless there's any more comments from the board, we can open up to public comment, and then I'd like to vote for a referral to the board for approval.
It's not a vote. We just make the
A
motion.
motion in a second. Yeah,
There are no public comments.
great. Monty,
I'll make the motion to refer this to the board for approval.
Second.
great. Thank you, crew. Great questions, great presentation, and we'll move on to item 2, an information only item for an annual review of policy 33, investment policy.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the next item here, we do not have a presentation. This is our required annual public review of our investment policy. And so attached to the staff report is the current investment policy. That's board policy number 33. I've summarized it briefly in the staff report. And just really to highlight the purpose of this, right? The purpose of this is to make sure that we are being good stewards of ratepayer funds when we do have a surplus in our reserves. And the objective of our investment portfolio, number one, is safety to ensure the principal of the funds we have on hand. Liquidity, secondly, to make sure the funds are available to be spent when needed. Thirdly, would be return on investment, and then also public trust is a factor in there. So this is a policy that has been on the books for years. Again, we are required each year to bring this to the board in a public meeting for a review and for approval going forward. The last revision was made in 2021, early 2021, and that was to add a quarterly reporting component of our investment earnings. And so that's what you see each quarter as Shelley and I bring that to you in terms of our review of the investment portfolio. At this time, staff is not recommending any changes to this policy, although I would note that it's part of our next 6-month plan to bring back to this committee and to the full board a series of policy reviews and updates just to make sure we are keeping track not only with kind of the growth of our overall budget, but with overall codes and best practices in the state. And there are quite a few, kind of nuances to these policies, so it takes a little while to go through them. Investment policy is pretty standard. It's something that every public agency has, and our current policy does not deviate from those standards. We'll be bringing back also later this year a more formal conversation on reserve policies. I know we had a brief discussion on that as part of the rate setting process. It was brought up the other night in terms of what is the right target. So we'll bring back the reserve policies later in the fall. We'll also bring back purchasing policies and debt limit policies for this committee and for the full board's review. But as I mentioned at this time, the investment policy is here for public review and for board comment. We are not recommending any change at this time, but I'm happy to take any questions and or any comments from the board.
Great, Brett, I reviewed this with you and I'm supportive. I have no questions. I'll leave it to folks in the room if they have any.
Well, there's a couple things, just for information, using this policy, which hasn't changed since 2008. We lost $1 million to Lehman Brothers, who met all these conditions and still took us for $1 million. San Mateo County lost $350 million in the same event. So it is just a word of caution that even when you meet these criterion, you can get into difficulties that may not be expected. The other thing is that Larry Bragman brought up many times the potential for using Ginnie Mae bonds to increase the rate of return. I think that's something that still is valid. I can only imagine the returns must be even greater than they were with the new interest rates. So that's something I think we should take a look at. And I understand the difference and, you know, the issues of how long we tie the money up for and those kind of things and what happens, like the insurance question, you know, how much risk you want to take and how much hit you take. You need the money. So, but that's something I think it's worth taking a gander at least.
Thank you.
Brett, I'm
Rajiv?
not sure if this falls under investment policy or reserve policy, but I am curious about our funding for pension and OPEB liabilities and how we allocate towards those financial requirements. If it's something related, if this is related to our reserve policies, then, you know, take it up at a later date.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And actually it's not related. So our pension and our OPEB policies, our funding practices are not covered by either of these. And so that may be something we want to bring to the board, is maybe an addition of that. Typically it's relatively straightforward. So for pensions, we are required by CalPERS to meet our annual funding requirement. And so we do that each year. That's determined by the CalPERS actuaries. We do have options to pay accelerated amounts towards that if we choose to. And there are some new investment vehicles that are being used by some other public agencies to kind of pre-fund your pension liabilities. And so just to kind of, you know, stop on that for a minute, OPEB, which is for retiree healthcare liabilities, that has been set up for 15 years or so with the certified investment vehicles that you can use to save money for your retiree health liabilities. Pension costs are typically handled fully through CalPERS, but now they are offering kind of a side, you know, investment that you can do to put ahead more money, you know, in something that could grow or, you know, or lose over time. The district has not chosen to do that yet. And it is not something that's necessarily high on my list, but it may be something we want to incorporate to give future flexibility into a policy like this, to where we could add that as a place to put our money in the meantime, right? That definitely comes with more risk, but it is probably still covered in kind of the overall header of safer investments, as Director Russell was referring to, not risk-free, but safer. And so if we chose to try to do that, it could be incorporated into our funding practices. For OPEB in general, the idea there is you get an actuary to look at your retiree health liabilities over the long term, and they give you what's called an actuarially determined contribution each year that you're supposed to put ahead. It's not a requirement, but it's a kind of a funding target. We have maintained the practice of funding our full actuarial contribution each year for the past, I think, 10 years or so here. We could make policies that are more aggressive than that, or that more outline what we do. But just to kind of, you know, wrap this up, the pension and retiree health policy or funding practices we have are not included in this particular policy, nor are they in other policies. So it's been more of just a funding practice and a best practice for us.
I think it's important to recognize that once you pay that money to PERS, it's gone.
Yep.
Can't get it back. So it's basically a business decision. it is quite complex, the system. There are interest charges from PERS. If you don't make your number, you don't pay it full, they charge you. So you're balancing those issues all the time as to what you can get on the money versus what they're charging you for the money. There is a $2 million reserve set aside to address this issue. You'll hear the term unfunded liability. And I have a real problem with that concept because in business, all expenses in the future are unfunded. Our power bill next year is unfunded. So I don't think it's really a fair descriptor of it. It is unfunded. That's true. But as I said, in business, most of your expenses are unfunded. You don't know for sure how much money you're going to make until you make it, and then you pay your expenses. So it doesn't mean we shouldn't increase that reserve, and I believe we should. Because in fact, I actually had a conversation with one of my constituents who was whining pretty hard about pensions. This is for those of you who haven't heard the story. At the end of a breakfast, he said to me that, Lair, I'm going to have to get rid of my second jet. Yeah. Costing me too much money to have the second jet sit on the tarmac. I go, oh, okay. Now let's kind of put this in perspective with $60,000 pensions. But he actually said that he would be willing to pay a kind of a capital call as a member. One of the things I've been trying to get people to understand is we're basically a corporation. We don't function in that way, but we do. And everybody is an owner of the corporation. They don't hold stock in it, but they hold it by their position. And capital calls can happen in corporations. The purpose of the capital call would be to deal with the unfunded liability, the liability future retirement. So this guy is saying he would be willing to pay into that kind of thing. I don't know what most people would feel about that, but it would be a way to speed up the process. The other side of it is it hasn't been increased since Krishna was here, and it's got to be 8 years ago. We set up the $2 million. It got funded once, and it's not set aside. It's just part of the reserves. So, but it was 2 million that was taken from this side and put over there in reserves. The number is something like 80 million, or
The number for what?
the unfunded part, what they would call unfunded.
For pensions alone? Yeah, I think it's like 77 this year because of the market, but yeah. it's around
Just
there.
to give you a feel for what kind of numbers we're talking about. And, Social Security works on this basis all the time. I mean, it's most things do. So you pay into it and you look to the future because of people paying into the future. So it's basically a business decision. And, but it is a strategic move because I think the public would view it as a wise thing to do.
Well, I think we're getting off target here a little bit, Brett, but is this something that the group would like to have a deeper discussion about in the future?
I think it would be good just to understand where we sit with respect to being able to manage, future pension costs and OPEB costs, because it does come up in discussion. So being able to respond to that with clarity, I think is helpful. And Brett, I understand that you're not these other special investment vehicles that are being established for public agencies to help manage the risks of pension may not be very attractive at the moment for the district. It'd be good to just hear, down the road what the pros and cons of those types of opportunities. I think Larry mentioned some, but
Sure. Yeah, no, I think it'd be appropriate for us to come back maybe in a couple of months to an FAC and just give a report out on, unfunded retiree liabilities, where we stand, on our different options. I would say that we should be getting within a couple of weeks here the recent CalPERS update, and so we'll have fresher information on our on our pension side of the house. We have a 2-year practice for our OPEB, for our retiree health. So we won't have that soon, but we still have last year's report to go off. So I can work with Shelley and we can schedule something maybe for August or September to kind of take a look into that.
Again, putting things in perspective, there was a period of time, like 5 years, where you had to make no contributions to PERS, CalPERS, because their return on investments was so high that they said, don't pay us at all. Do you know what their return was last year?
So just quickly to the 5 years of no payment. So that was kind of part of the end of the .com days when everyone was making a lot of money in the market. And that's what led to pension changes that were retroactive and really bankrupted a lot of cities and counties across the state. That's what ultimately led to PEPRA in 2013, which limited everything you can do going forward. So right now, our options are much more limited than they were, 10 years ago by PEPRA. PEPRA tells you what you can do and how you can do it, and they manage those minimum contributions. The discussions are just if you want to go above and beyond that. As far as I know, last year's, we're on like a 2-year lag with CalPERS. So last year, which would they be looking back to 2021, they had a loss, I think, of 13 or 14%, which is on the heels of a gain of over 20% in 2020, which is kind of strange to think about during the pandemic. But, it's all timing because it's all based on June 30th. And there was a big run kind of at the end of that, with all the stimulus coming through at the end of the first phase of the pandemic. So we had a 20% gain, a 13% loss. And then this year, it's probably going to be something around an 8 or 9% gain. And so that's what the actuaries do is they take all of that over time and figure out how that shakes out. And they have a 5-year smoothing policy on that. So it really buffers the impact on a year-to-year basis for us and for all agencies. But overall, I think we're, generally doing better, I would say, over the last 4 or 5 years. And, probably it's a lot of the stimulus and the kind of the things that are going on the macro level. But I would say the market has been more favorable to us in the last 4 or 5 years as a whole than it was, 10 years ago or so.
Although I think they're still shooting at 7, right? That's the kind of number that I remember.
They've dropped that down to 6.75, and I want to say even 6.5 or 6.25 now. They have, with PEPRA again, they have these automatic provisions where if they meet their investment target, which was 7, by a certain amount, which the year I'm referring to is when they went, 20% gain, that automatically requires them to then lower their investment earnings going forward to be more conservative, and so that's what's going to be rolling through this next year is the results of all those kind of, once you take the target down, everyone has to actually pay more because you're assuming less in your investments, so more in your contributions. And so again, it'll be good this year that we are likely seeing a gain in the market. Right now S&P is like 8 or 9%, since last July. So somewhere in that range of what CalPERS is looking for, that 6 to 7% range.
So what we're talking about here is that CalPERS looks at their return. They take that number and then they spread it out over their cost basis, which is us.
Mhm.
And they tell us how much we have to pay. So this is done annually. They look at what they think they're going to make. And my money friends think they're terribly optimistic, but I think the Wall Street Journal thinks they're terribly optimistic. But they've had these years like the 20%. So they go, well, look at this. So that's what we're talking about here. So every year it's quite critical what CalPERS sets because it determines what our costs are going forward for that year.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good. All right, moving on to item 3, we have our monthly financial report.
Just wanted to also say that there was no public comment on that item too.
Thank you.
All right, item 3, monthly financial update, and I'll be brief here. I know we've gone a little long on the prior items, and I really, this is a continuation of each month's report, and there's not been a lot of change, as you've probably heard me say the last few months. So I'll take this quick. I'm happy to take questions, but I don't want to belabor kind of some of these same continuing trends. Revenues, sure.
Sure. Or just do that. That better?
Yeah, that's okay. You can drag it to the bottom and it'll put the picture on.
Okay.
And it should go.
Cannot hear what's being discussed.
It's not important.
We were just changing the view of the window here, the view in the boardroom. So first slide here is revenues, and it's again continuing the same trend of our water sales revenue kind of being the laggard as we've continued to be, in a period of historically low consumption. The other pieces on there, other revenue looks like a big percent there, 187%. It's really just the recognition of some of the grant revenues that came through that were kind of rolled over from prior years, but not a part of the original budget for 22-23. Fire flow fee is as expected. That gets given to us by the county in terms of their tax assessments. And so we have 2 of the 3 installments. We'll get the 3rd installment, and they're kind of true up over the summer. And our capital revenue, which is largely our CMF, is again on track for 1 more month worth of revenue here. So bottom line, 83.3%. Again, that's largely in line with our projections and kind of what we use as a basis for the budget and for the rate setting process.
How are we doing with delinquencies?
Delinquencies, we did the 5-year payment program, as you recall, last year, which really kind of helped get people back on track to be able to pay. And we have started again issuing our usual shut off notice and whatnot. So that's created quite a bit of activity as well. So delinquencies overall, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do believe between the state or the federal funds, the COVID funds we got last year, our 5-year payment plan, and then this last couple months of really ramping up our kind of outreach on past due notices, we're seeing an improvement in delinquencies and kind of a more sustainable level going forward.
So these numbers are accrual or actual?
These numbers are actual. Yeah, these are actual. Yeah.
So they would take that into account.
Yeah, they'll show if people aren't paying, you're not going to see it on here for here. Yeah. Okay. This is the slide that breaks down our water sales. Again, that being the laggard. And so the 2 on the right, service charge and watershed fee, largely in line with what we'd expect on a month-to-month basis and year-to-date basis. And as we've seen on the water sales there on the left, we've been kind of hovering around this 80-85% ish mark most of the year in terms of expected monthly revenues. In the last 3 70s, you see there 76, 70, and 70. That's again, this is a 2-month lag. So we're kind of, having to remember 2 months ago, still very, cool, moderate, weather and late rains. And so we're not really seeing an uptick here as we might usually see into the April and May time period. And so we'll have to keep watching this close as we get to June and July. Again, remembering that that's a 2-month lag. So, kind of having to rewind our billing system here, which captures the 2-month lag as opposed to our kind of current production. Although, we look outside today and it's still another cold and relatively moderate day. So it's generally, it's a good thing, and it's mostly within what we'd expect. But we did see a slowdown there in April and May as might be expected with the weather. Graphic trend again, comparing this year to last year. Last year, we were 12 million behind by the end of the year. This year, we're 10.5 million behind. So a slight improvement. We obviously hope for a little bit more improvement there, but nonetheless, 10.5 is still within where we've been projecting all year. This really shows the historically low consumption as we've been talking about. And interestingly here, just to kind of build off my prior comments, it's the fiscal 23 is just barely above fiscal 22. So we counted fiscal 22 as the low point, kind of an artificial low with all of our conservation measures in place. And this year it looks like, again, for a variety of reasons, we're right there in that range and still 20% plus off of the recent highs of fiscal 20 and fiscal 21. Expense side, we saw more of a slowdown this last month than expected, and I think sometimes it just takes a while to get the invoices in. But personnel services have been below trend all year as we had salary savings early in the year. It's that maintenance and operating expense that really kind of caught my eye this month in terms of being under 80 and not closer to that 85%. So we're trying to make sure we're working with all of our departments and divisions to get all invoices in and paid by the end of the year. That'll happen, this month and next month. And so I expect that number to be closer to, the 90s and 95% as we round out the year. We just need to make sure we get our bills paid on time there. Everything else, again, is kind of as you'd expect for the year, especially once you incorporate encumbrances there on the capital lines on the bottom. We're in that kind of 80%-ish range. And we expect, again, to fall into the 90 to 95% range by the end of the year in almost every category here. And so that leads to our projection. And we've been kind of giving this range of either 20 or 15% in terms of overall reduction in water sales. The rest of the numbers, as you kind of go down the columns, are the same, other than the water sales revenue loss. And then I would just say, based on the prior slides, we're closer to that 20% number now than we have been in the last couple months. And so that's really where we're expecting to end the year on the bottom line there is closer to that 20% column in all of the categories. And so that'll leave us again with using CMF for debt service, hopefully preserving most of our unrestricted operating fund balance, but then having to essentially use the CMF to its fullest extent this year to balance the operating fund as expected. But again, that 20% range is really that column that we're looking at for the year. So with that is just kind of a final wrap up here. We did experience fiscal challenges the last 2 years, primarily in our variable water sales budget. The one expense that we have seen, and we've talked about many times through the budget process, is our pavement restoration costs. The winter and the spring rainfall reduced more costs than that. So we had planned to have to use extra funds for Sula-Hule pumping and for importing water from Sonoma. We did not have to use those. And so that helped us out in terms of less use of reserves. And so it puts us in the financial position as largely as expected going into this year, into the end of the year and into the next budget cycle. And again, that's relatively little change from last month. And so I apologize for going through that so quickly, but I'm happy to take any questions.
I think you've been appropriately updating us on the traction and trajectory, and so no big surprises here. I'm good. Anything else, group in the room?
No questions for me.
Nothing from me.
Larry? Okay. Ben, I see Vicky's is at least signed in. I think we had, at least I had an expectation that we were going to have HR reporting out at each one of our finance and administration meetings. And, you know, it's not on the agenda, so I probably should have brought that up in the beginning, but I'm most curious about our open hires and how we can help with recruiting. And so I'd like to make sure that we do have our kind of admin side, staff side report out at each of these meetings. And if you need another board member to suggest that we continue that practice, then happy to do that.
Yeah, what we are planning at the next meeting to give an update on some HR items.
Okay, yeah. I think if we can do it at every meeting, that would be great. You know, there is obviously, because we've been having closed sessions regarding the union negotiations, we're not going to report out on that now. I think what I'm most concerned about that I think we should all be aware of is the timing, right? I think that we want to get clarity on the timing to get that done. And as much as we can help the staff focus on expediting, that would be great. Any other comments from any other directors? Any public comments, Terry?
There are none.
All right, with that said, we are adjourned. Thank you, group. Have a great weekend.